Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
All right, well, good morning. It's great to be here. And Victoria, thanks so much for helping us set up this morning and get rolling. Only a minute or two behind schedule, but that's okay. So before we get into specific issues, I wanted to just introduce myself so you know who you're talking to on the other end of the video here. My name is Dylan Doty. I've been a lobbyist since 2009, working down here in Olympia. I had worked in politics before that. Sadly, been doing this for a long time. And I've been working with Muckleshoot really since about 2010 or so. I have gotten really engaged in their issues and have been one of two primary lobbyists for the tribe over the past 8 or so years. My issue areas are typically for the tribe anything outside of natural resources. That's kind of how we differentiate our lobbying style here for Muckleshoot. So we have one of my colleagues kind of focuses on the natural resources stuff. I focus typically on all of the other. So that would be gambling issues, healthcare issues, education issues, tax policy, very exciting. But all of those types of things. And so we've got a long list of issues that we can go through this year. But before we get into those, I wanted to take just a brief minute and ask a couple of questions. Are you guys familiar with the Washington State legislative process? Yes or no?
Kind of.
Kinda. So we're about 3 weeks into session here. And what that means, our legislature meets every year, but only for a relatively short amount of time. This is the long year, quote unquote, long year, where they have to come up with all of their budgets and things like that before the end of the year. We start every year the second Monday in January. And this year we run for 105 consecutive days. That counts Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, all of that. And so 105 days doesn't seem like a long time maybe, but trust me, in legislative time it is. It goes fast at times, other times it goes painfully slow, but we will be wrapped up at the end of April, assuming they get done on time. So this year, as a long session, like I said, they're tasked with passing a constitutionally mandated balanced operating budget. So to fund everything from the Department of Health, the Department of Ecology, anything that you think of for government operations, that comes in the operating budget. They also have to pass a transportation budget. This is where we'll get into a few interesting things that the class and Muckleshoot are very interested in, things like culvert funding or fish passage barrier removal. That's one of the things that is a very hot topic this year. That can sometimes come in the transportation budget or the third of the three, which is the capital budget, which is the infrastructure and building, community centers. Again, culverts can fit under that, anything that would be an investment from the state. And so those are the three big budgets that they have to get done this year before the end of session, before they all go home for the year. But in addition to those issues, obviously, there are a ton of what we call just policy issues that are up for discussion every year in Olympia. And some of those come from Muckleshoot and other tribes. Sometimes we will push an issue. We'll try to get it introduced and push something proactively. Other times we're reacting to what other groups, sometimes they're favorable, sometimes they're not, but we're reacting to what other groups are putting in. And we have a few of those on both sides this year that we'll get into in just a couple of minutes. But one of the main things that I do for the tribe, I'm on contract with Muckleshoot, and that means that I'm down here in Olympia every day during the legislative session. I'm tracking every bill that gets introduced. We are working the committee process, trying to get bills up for hearing or opposing bills, like I said, that may have come from a group that is not us, that we're not so keen on. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a colleague who focuses on natural resources for the tribe. So we have kind of a split workload, which is great because as you'll find out, tribal governments are involved in everything. And I mean that truly. There's not an issue area or a focus area down here in Olympia that the tribe does not have some interest in. And we can just think at the 30,000 foot level, healthcare issues. Are those going to impact the tribe? Of course they are. Is state policy on criminal justice reform going to impact the tribe? Absolutely it is. Ecology, salmon, things of that nature. All of those types of issues are before each and every committee down here in Olympia. And obviously there are things that we are focusing on as well to make sure that nothing bad happens to the tribe. And in fact, we get a few good things out of the legislative process this year. And so with that, I'm going to kind of stop and ask a quick question here about whether there are specific issues or issue areas maybe that the folks here in the class are particularly interested in. Are there things that you guys are focusing on, or at least paying attention to in the legislative process, and anything that I could answer? If not, we'll go through a few ideas to give you some examples of what there is, but I'll just start there and ask if there's anything in particular that you guys would like to focus on before I take you down a different road.
You can talk, yeah.
Yep.
Was that like the thing that we're talking about? Yes. Oh, so like the native voting right thing?
Yeah.
That.
So that's a bill that has already passed the Senate. So this is a very fast moving bill. I don't want to bore you too much with process, but I will tell you that there are deadlines along the way to keep things moving during the legislative process. The first deadline to get a bill out of committee is not until February 22nd. And so if you see a bill that's already come up, passed out of committee, passed off the floor of that chamber, in this case, the Senate, that's a fast-tracked bill. That's moving really quickly. We saw one of those early this year before I get back to voting rights. If you followed Initiative 940, the police use of force initiative, that's the first bill that the governor has actually signed into law this session. That passed the first week of session. Obviously something that they very much wanted to get done. You typically see that with big time issues like, again, police use of force, things like that early in session. But this particular one, prime sponsored by Senator John McCoy, who's actually a tribal member from Tulalip. And he is a very strong champion, as you would imagine, of tribal issues. And he introduces a number of bills every year, and some move, some don't. This one looks like it's moving forward very quickly this year. It came out of the Senate with a bipartisan vote, which means that not just the Democrats who are in control, but there also were a handful of Republicans who voted yes on that. And really, the focus of that bill is to get greater access to tribal communities and ensure their right to vote is really tangible and not just something that is, is mentioned, but it's something tangible that they do. And what does that mean? It means making it easier to register to vote. Making sure that you have a place to go to register to vote, making sure you have a place to go to drop your ballot off when you need to vote. And so one of the components of the bill is to add the ballot drop boxes that you sometimes see around the counties and make sure that tribal communities have those. Muckleshoot has one right at the Phillips Star building already, which is great, but a lot of other tribal communities may not have those. And so that's a component. One of the other components of the bill is making sure you have a physical address to register. And this can be a problem in some communities where folks, even if they're not experiencing homelessness, for instance, they might have a transitory situation. And we want to make sure that they've got a permanent address and a place to be able to register, because you have to have that physical address to be able to register to vote in your community. And so those are the types of things that the bill is aiming to do. As I said, that's one that we can very easily track. That's one that Muckleshoot is supporting. And there are various ways, good example here of showing the various ways of how we support a bill. So Senator McCoy dropped that bill in. He sponsored that bill. So tribes then reviewed it and determined whether they wanted to be a pro or be in favor of it, or if they had any concerns with it. Obviously, in this case, tribes, I think universally are supporting that bill. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we might come and testify at the public hearing in favor of it. We might put together a panel of tribal members or representatives like myself, or maybe, and here's a hint, maybe students, if that's so inclined, come down and testify before the committee and explain why you're supporting the bill. There's other things that we have to do to make sure the bill passes, like work the committee members individually and make sure they understand why the bill is important. These guys see thousands of bills, literally thousands of bills in a legislative session. And so not every legislator knows all of the details of every last bill. And so it's our job to make sure that the ones who need to know what the bill does and know who supports it. And so we do things like that. And so that's a really good example of a bill that's moving fast right now. There will likely be a hearing in the next couple of weeks on the House side, because that was a Senate bill that moved over. And bills have to pass both the House and the Senate in the exact same form, right down to every comma or piece of punctuation. If there's anything different when it passes the Senate or the House, it has to go back to the original chamber to be voted on again, because it has to pass in an identical form. So that's a bill that I'll be sure to keep the class apprised of. And if there's any interest in supporting that bill on behalf of the class or anything like that, we can certainly talk about that. So that's a great example and a great issue. Anything else that's been on the radar?
Yeah, if you're interested. Go ahead.
You want me to say?
You say it.
The gambling one.
So gambling is one of the biggest issues that tribes, especially Muckleshoot, will engage in every session. And I probably don't need to tell you all why. Gambling revenue obviously is really the driver for tribes these days. And Muckleshoot does a great job diversifying their economic interests. But gambling revenue is still the king of them all, so to speak, when it comes to tribal revenue. And in that vein, there are a couple of threats this year and a couple of opportunities. And so this is a good example of some of the things that we might put forward that we're being proactive about, but at the same time, there might be other issues that other groups are pushing that could be detrimental. And the example that I'll give on that is sports betting. You guys may have followed, there's a US Supreme Court case last year that basically said that the federal law that prohibited states from being able to offer sports betting. So if you wanted to bet on the Seahawks or the Mariners, probably not so much the Mariners these days, but if you wanted to bet on some of those things, the federal law said you couldn't unless you were in Vegas, essentially. The US Supreme Court struck down that law, which means now it's up to the states to authorize sports betting if they wanted to. Anything that would cut into tribal gaming like this, so say if sports betting was authorized in the state, but it was authorized for non-tribal interests, that could be really problematic to tribes because that could be a big market. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're working with other tribes to see if we can get a proposal in that would authorize sports betting at tribal casinos. And because Muckleshoot owns Emerald Downs, the horse track up in Auburn, we're also looking at what element or how that would interplay, because obviously that's not an official tribal casino right now. And so how would we be able to square that circle if we wanted to be able to authorize sports betting for tribal casinos? Is there a way to do that where you could also include Emerald Downs? We're exploring that right now. That's an opportunity. There's a threat that's also out there, and there's not a bill yet, but that we hear one coming on social gaming apps. And these are the apps on your phone that you can play, and they might charge you a fee or charge you to buy tokens so you can continue to play. That looks like and acts a lot like gambling, even if you can't cash it out. And so there's a push right now to try to figure out what those things are. And do we need to change the law to either authorize them or not authorize them, if that makes sense? Just these little handheld things that you can do, whether it's, I'm not big into that, so I don't know. I know that, like Candy Crush or things like that, those have not been problematic yet. But anytime you pay to be able to continue to play, that's a thing of value. We can get into the weeds on this, but those are the opportunities and the threats. There's also a couple of interesting things about problem gambling. Now, one of the things that you'll notice about Muckleshoot and other tribes is that even though we encourage and enjoy the gambling revenue, we want to be responsible about it. And we understand that gambling, just like any other addictive behavior, can become problematic for some people who have certain addictive tendencies. And so what we've done is we've created a self-exclusion program where if you self-identify as a problem gambler, then you can inform the casino, and they will say, okay, wait a minute, if you try to come in here, we're going to talk to you and say, do you really want to do that? There's a bill out there right now, a piece of legislation from the Washington Gambling Commission that would replicate that exact style of program statewide for everything. Card rooms, potentially even the lottery, Washington Lottery. And so that's one of the issues that's out there. There's also a problem gambling task force proposal, because as we move forward, and you probably see this, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of some of the negative qualities of addictive behavior, and it can track on all sorts of different things: substance abuse issues, alcohol, drugs, opioids. Gambling is not the same, but it's not completely different either. It can be something that people get addicted to. And so they want to put together a task force, a statewide task force, to examine ways of solving the problem gambling problem. And that's something that the tribe and me and other representatives are very involved in, to make sure that they're doing it and doing it right. And so those gambling issues are definitely at the forefront. And really, whether it's me or any other representative for the tribes will tell you that the gambling is, for better or worse, like I said, kind of the lifeblood of revenue for tribes right now. And so we do everything we can to protect tribal gaming interests and to look very skeptically at anything that would potentially expand or authorize non-tribal gaming that could be a competitor for us. So that's a really good one. We'll keep an eye on those. And if and when the sports betting bills get dropped, I'll make sure that the class is aware of that so we can follow some of those things.
You want me to talk about the well one?
So these are just introductions to like the problem gambling, or
Yeah.
They're just the bill is just on the beginning phase? Or?
Yeah, so the problem gambling task force bill, Senate Bill 5818 and House Bill 1880, just got introduced. They are scheduled, at least House Bill 1880 is scheduled for a hearing next week. And typically what happens when a bill gets introduced, I don't know if people still watch the How a Bill Becomes a Law cartoon from back in the 80s. I sure did when I was a kid, but once a bill gets introduced, usually about a week or so later, it'll be scheduled for a public hearing. And the public hearing is a committee hearing that will put the bill before the legislature for the first time. And they invite members of the public, stakeholders, really anybody who has an interest in that topic to come forward. You're typically given anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes to explain why you either support or have concerns with the bill. And they take that into consideration before trying to move it forward or not. That bill is up for hearing next week, the task force bill. And that's in the House Commerce and Gaming Committee. And I believe that's up on Monday. Yeah, that's up on creating a joint legislative task force on problem gambling is up on Monday at 1:30 p.m. in the House Commerce and Gaming Committee. And so that'll be the first opportunity for the legislature to hear either support or concern on that particular bill. And I can already tell you that even though the concept is good, one of the things that we have to worry about is the details and how the bill is written. And really, anytime you're talking about a piece of legislation, I like to kind of go through a little 1, 2, 3 step thing. And the first is to identify what problem are we trying to solve here. So number 1 is, what is the problem? Now, number 2 is, will this bill solve that problem? Is this the way to attack that problem? If yes, then you kind of go to the third step, and that's the details part. Okay, what are the trade-offs, and do we need to really alter this or not? Because every policy, good, bad, or indifferent, does have trade-offs somewhere along the way. And so for this bill, we've spoken with some of the other tribal folks in this arena, and there are a couple of wording issues, like I said, really details in the bill. We want to make sure the references are good. For instance, when we're talking about a bill that's going to have a member of the tribal community on a task force, one of the things that we really focus on is, how do they word that? We need to see that it's going to be a member from a federally recognized Indian tribe. That's a key phrasing. Do we know how many federally recognized tribes there are in Washington?
29.
Perfect. Somebody knows their stuff. No cheating. Come on, guys. No. 29. I could also ask how many counties there are in Washington. Anybody know that one? There's 39 counties. So we have almost as many federally recognized tribes as counties. But anyway, one of the reasons that's important, obviously, is because there are other non-federally recognized tribal communities in the state that for whatever reason do not have that federal designation. And we're very protective of that, because along with that federal designation of being a federally recognized tribe, that brings with it certain abilities to have a casino, for instance, to have trust land, reservation land. And so those things are really important. So we'll work on making sure that the wording of a bill like this task force bill is appropriate, that the references are appropriate, that they make sure that they're working through the issues with the right people at the table. And so that's one of the things that we end up doing a lot down here, is if the bill is something that, if we've identified a problem that needs to be solved, we think a bill is the appropriate way to do it. Now let's make sure that the bill itself, A, does what it's supposed to do, but B, that there aren't any negative trade-offs, and we can make sure that the phrasing and the wording is really good on that. So that's a really good example of a bill that's coming up for hearing next week. And when next we meet, we'll be able to kind of see where that's going in the process. And I know we've got about 5 minutes left. I did want to say that I've talked to Victoria a little bit about maybe getting the class down to Olympia. And that would be something that we're very interested in doing. I'm going to get a few dates and times. There are some times that are better than others. So I'm going to first, I'll start by sending a list of when not to come to Olympia, and then we'll kind of work backwards that way. But if The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send a couple of these bills, to the class. And if there's one or two that you might want to testify on, or you might want to have me testify on in favor or, with concerns on behalf of the class, that's something that we can do. And we can work through how to put together talking points for that bill, how to put together, just a quick 2-3 minutes of, good morning, Madam Chair, my name is so-and-so. I'm a tribal student at Muckleshoot Tribal School, and I'm here in support of HB, House Bill, whatever. We can work on that. We can also have me do some of that for you, but it would be great to get you down here and get you seeing the process firsthand, and maybe have an opportunity to do that on your own. That would be wonderful. So are there any other bills or issues that maybe we could highlight here in our remaining couple of minutes? Or
Yeah, you can ask.
What kind of wells are those? Orca wells?
Oh yeah. So this was a pretty big issue over the summer and fall and heading into session. We probably all saw the news coverage of the orcas and the failing health of a few of them in the Puget Sound. And that really led the governor to put together a task force on orcas, on salmon recovery, all of the different things that go into our Puget Sound habitat. And so there are a handful of bills out there right now that are focused on orcas and salmon, and they're kind of intertwined. For instance, there's a bill that would prohibit watercraft and vessels from being too close to orcas. That's one of the things that the task force identified as being a potential problem. Anybody know what a pinniped is? Pinnipeds are seals, sea lions. And there's a bill that just got introduced, and it's up for hearing next week, I believe, let me see if I've got it here. On Valentine's Day, next Thursday morning, there's a bill addressing impacts of pinnipeds, which would essentially allow for more seals to be killed. Seals eat salmon. And there's an alarm.
That was our
Okay. Well, so anyway, what I was saying is that there's a bill out there that would increase the allowable number of pinnipeds, poaching, killing. And the idea behind that is that if we can increase the salmon population, and seals eat a lot of salmon, then that can help our orcas. That's also going to help tribal communities, obviously. And so there's kind of this fun little interplay here of what's good for the orca is good for the state as well. And that's one of the reasons why this has gotten so much attention. And so there are a couple of bills, and I'll send the particular bill numbers. I think I already sent a couple of them to the class to make sure that we're tracking those as well. Whether it's vessel impact, watercraft impact, whether it's the pinniped impact, whether it is the one other aspect is culverts, fish passage barrier removal. So there was a U.S. Supreme Court case that said the state needs to fund culvert removal. This is something that the tribes, U.S. v. Washington, have worked on for a long time, and the state has not done it. What that means is, think of any big roadway that's been built. There's supposed to be passages to allow fish to move up and downstream there. Throughout history, those have been either built too small, they've been blocked for whatever reason, and that's really impacting negatively the fish flow, the salmon flow upstream. And so trying to get money to do that is one of the big issues this session, and it's part of the entire discussion on salmon habitat recovery, as well as the orca issue. And so those are the things that we're really focusing on, and I'm putting a couple of stars and highlights next to these bills that we've chatted about today, so I can make sure I get the details to the class, and maybe we can get folks down here sometime in the next few weeks before the end of session like I said, we're going to be in good shape schedule-wise, heading into February and March, and really looking forward to working with you guys.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank